What would you do if you found out that your children, your own flesh and blood, had been erased from history? Imagine the shock, the disbelief, the anger bubbling inside you. For Prince Harry, this nightmare didn't come from a distant threat or a scandal in the tabloids. It came directly from the very walls of Buckingham Palace. On a cold, gray morning, a message arrived that would shake him to his core. King Charles had confirmed the final decision to delete Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana from the succession line forever. Every parent's instinct is to protect their children. But what do you do when the threat comes not from the world, but from your own family? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed. Social media erupted with outrage and disbelief. But behind the cameras, behind the carefully manicured statements, the story was far darker, far more personal. This wasn't just a constitutional move. This was a decision that cut deep into family ties, resurrected old wounds, and forced a father to confront a truth he never imagined he would face. And yet, most of the world would never see the private agony, the silent fury, the sleepless nights Harry endured in those first hours. Let's take a step back. To understand why this is such a seismic moment, you need to know exactly what the line of succession means, not just legally, but symbolically. The line of succession is more than a series of names on a royal ledger. It's a legacy. It's centuries of tradition, politics, and expectations. Every child's position in that line determines their future, their responsibilities, and their place in history. And for Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, this wasn't just a title. It was the guarantee that their names would be remembered in the lineage of one of the world's most scrutinized monarchies. To have that taken away, it's almost unimaginable. Harry's relationship with the monarchy has always been complicated. From his mother's tragic death to the constant media pressure, from his battle for independence to his very public exit from royal duties, Harry has navigated a life under the microscope. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for this moment. The confirmation from King Charles wasn't just a bureaucratic formality. It was a personal blow, one that left him reeling. Imagine being told that your children, your most sacred responsibility, are no longer recognized as heirs to a throne they are entitled to by birth. What would you do? Fight, plead, or retreat into silence? And it wasn't just Harry. Meghan Markle, his wife, felt the weight of the world crash down on her in that instant. She has faced criticism, scrutiny, and public judgment for years, yet this was different. This was personal, existential. This was about their children. The decision forced them both into a corner where no advisor, no lawyer, and no public statement could offer immediate relief. Every move from that point on would carry consequences not only for themselves, but for the very legacy of their children. But why now? Why did King Charles decide to take such a radical step at this exact moment? Some say it's a matter of tradition. Others hint at internal palace politics, simmering rivalries, and the ever-present tension between duty and personal feelings. The truth is, the decision is the culmination of decades of hidden maneuvers, whispered secrets, and calculated power plays. There were meetings that the public never knew about, conversations behind closed doors, and documents tucked away in private archives that influenced this unprecedented move. And while the world debates the morality of the act, the palace has its own reasons that may never fully come to light. Now, here's a fact that will surprise many. In the history of the British monarchy, there has never been a complete removal of a child from the line of succession by the sovereign alone. There have been abdications, controversial exclusions, and political maneuvers, but never a permanent, unilateral deletion. This decision breaks centuries of precedent and sends shockwaves through royal historians, legal experts, and the public alike. The implications are staggering. It's not just a personal loss for Harry and Meghan. It's a historical event, a rupture in tradition that will be studied for decades. And yet, amidst all this chaos, there's a quiet, almost unbearable tension. Harry is torn between public perception and private fury. He knows that every reaction will be scrutinized, every word analyzed, every expression dissected. The media will spin, critics will attack, and supporters will rally, but none of that touches the raw, human reality of being told your children are no longer recognized in the very institution that once promised to protect them. Let's pause for a moment and consider Harry's perspective. He has fought battles on multiple fronts. Against the press, against intrusive institutions, and even against internal pressures within his own family. He's not new to controversy, but this is different. This is not about a scandal or a misstep. This is about identity, legacy, and the very definition of family. And it's happening on a scale so immense that there is no easy fix, no simple response, no clean resolution. But what makes this story even more compelling is what comes next. Because the confirmation from King Charles did not just leave Harry in shock, it set off a chain reaction, a series of events, confrontations, and revelations that nobody saw coming. Secrets that have been buried for years began surfacing. Alliances shifted. Some members of the royal family were suddenly forced to take sides, and the media, always hungry for a story, smelled blood in the water. Every moment became a potential headline, every whisper a possible leak. And in the middle of it all stood Harry, grappling with anger, fear, and a sense of betrayal so profound that it threatened to redefine his life. So what does this mean for Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana? For now, they are legally erased from the line of succession. But the implications are far broader than titles and ceremonial duties. This decision casts a shadow over their childhoods, over their sense of identity, and over their relationship with the institution their grandfather, King Charles, represents. It also raises questions about fairness, privilege, and the often invisible cost of tradition. Can a parent truly shield their children from such monumental decisions? And if not, what is left to protect? For the audience watching at home, this story is more than royal drama. It's a study in human emotion, power, and resilience. It's about a father's love tested to the extreme, a mother's fierce protection, and the fragile balance between duty and compassion. It's about secrets that can no longer stay hidden, truths that demand confrontation, and consequences that ripple across generations. And yet, even with all the anger, all the fear, and all the uncertainty, there is a spark of hope, a chance for reckoning, and perhaps even redemption. But what form that will take remains unknown. What we do know is that the events set in motion by King Charles's decision will not fade quietly. They will reverberate through the halls of Buckingham Palace, across the media landscape, and deep into the hearts of those involved. The phone rang at an hour Harry would later describe as surreal. The kind of hour when the world is silent, when sleep clings to your eyelids and reality feels distant. But sleep had no place that night. On the other end was a voice that carried authority, history, and expectation, King Charles. And the words that followed would echo in Harry's mind for weeks, months, perhaps years. The decision is final, Charles said. Archie and Lilibet will be removed from the line of succession. Harry froze. For a moment, nothing else existed. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the familiar London night outside his window suddenly alien. His mind raced, questions colliding in a chaotic jumble. How? Why? How could this happen? Was this really happening? He had faced the press, endured endless scrutiny, and walked into controversy countless times. He had faced political maneuvering, personal betrayals, and public judgment. But this was a different kind of strike. It wasn't about him. It was about his children. Imagine being a parent and hearing those words. Your children, your most sacred responsibility, are erased from history. A thought so unimaginable that it feels almost unreal. And yet, there it was, delivered calmly, almost clinical in tone, by the man who was meant to embody stability, continuity, and family. The king had made his choice, and it was irreversible. The line of succession, a centuries-old guarantee, had been rewritten in a matter of moments. Harry's first instinct was disbelief. Surely this had to be a mistake. There had to be some administrative error, a miscommunication. He demanded clarification, needing to hear the words again, to make sure his mind wasn't playing tricks on him. But there was no error. There was no misunderstanding. Charles spoke with the measured authority of a monarch who had made up his mind. No room for negotiation. No discussion. The finality of the decree hit Harry like a physical blow. And then came the anger. Pure, unfiltered anger. Not just at the decision itself, but at the manner in which it had been delivered. No warning, no preparation, no private conversation to ease the blow. Harry felt cornered, trapped between his role as a son and his role as a father. Every instinct screamed to fight, to protect, to demand justice for his children. But every protocol, every deeply ingrained lesson in royal decorum, held him back. The tension inside him built, a storm that could not be easily contained. As he hung up the phone, the quiet of the night returned, but the world had changed. Harry paced his room, hands clenching and unclenching, mind racing through memories and possibilities. He thought of Diana, his mother, and the lessons she had taught him about fairness, compassion, and courage. He thought of Archie, of Lilibet, of the bright, innocent faces of his children who had no understanding of what had just happened. How could he explain this to them? How could he protect them from a system that now openly rejected their place within it? The phone call was only the beginning. What followed in the hours and days after would test every limit of his patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. Advisors whispered, legal experts speculated, and palace insiders offered guidance that often conflicted with one another. Harry found himself in a labyrinth of decisions where every choice carried risk, every word might be turned against him, and every move would be scrutinized by the world. But let's pause to consider what the removal actually meant. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It had concrete implications. Titles, responsibilities, access to certain estates, ceremonial precedents. All of these elements were now uncertain. And beyond that, there was a psychological and emotional toll, an invisible weight that pressed on Harry and Meghan as they navigated a new reality in which their children's futures had been dramatically altered by the very institution that had once promised to protect them. As Harry sat alone, the gravity of the situation settled in. There was fear, yes, but also a sense of betrayal. For years, he had walked a careful line, balancing personal independence with loyalty to his family, navigating media scrutiny, and defending his mother's legacy. And now, that same family had delivered a verdict that threatened to undo everything he had fought to preserve. The anger, though intense, was accompanied by a piercing sense of responsibility. He could not allow this to go unanswered. He owed it to Archie. He owed it to Lilibet. He owed it to himself. But what could he do? Public confrontation was risky. Legal challenges were slow and uncertain. Any action could be twisted, distorted, or weaponized against him in a relentless media cycle. And yet, inaction was not an option. The very idea of accepting this decision in silence was unthinkable. Every instinct screamed to act, to push back, to demand recognition for his children. And so, the seeds of a complex, emotionally charged journey were sown in that phone call. A journey that would take him deep into the heart of palace politics, media scrutiny, and familial tension like never before. And then there was the human side of the story. The emotional toll of the phone call was not just public or political. It was profoundly personal. Harry had to navigate his own feelings while also protecting Meghan, who was grappling with her own shock and outrage. The dynamics of their partnership were tested as they faced the surreal reality of their children being stripped of a legacy they were entitled to by birth. Their conversations, often whispered late at night, were filled with strategy, emotion, and fear. Every plan carried stakes higher than either of them had ever faced. The call also triggered a cascade of questions about loyalty, trust, and family. How could his own father, the man who had shaped his understanding of duty and legacy, make a decision that so fundamentally impacted his children? Where did loyalty to tradition end and betrayal begin? These were questions that haunted Harry in the quiet moments, questions without easy answers, questions that would drive his next actions. And just when it seemed the weight of reality might crush him, another layer of complexity emerged: the public. The media would soon learn, if it hadn't already, and the world would judge. Every expression, every statement, every reaction would be scrutinized. And Harry knew this all too well. He had faced the press for decades, but this was different. This was intimate. This was his family, his children, his future. And the consequences of missteps could ripple far beyond personal embarrassment. They could shape history itself. Yet even in that moment of despair, Harry felt a spark of clarity. The phone call, while devastating, also crystallized his priorities. This was about protecting his children, securing their place in history, and confronting the reality that family loyalty does not always align with justice. And so, as the night stretched on, he began to plan, to consider every option, every potential ally, every possible strategy. The phone call had shocked him, but it had also awakened a determination that few could match. The palace corridors were silent. Not the usual, carefully maintained silence that comes from protocol and decorum, but a tense, almost electric hush, the kind that signals something extraordinary is happening behind closed doors. In one of the grandest rooms of Buckingham Palace, a meeting was unfolding that would shape the future of the monarchy in ways the public could scarcely imagine. This was not a press conference, not a ceremonial announcement. This was private, secret, deliberate. A gathering of power, history, and ambition. And at its center, King Charles. It was the kind of meeting designed to be invisible. No cameras, no official press releases, no record beyond the memories of those present. Only the key players, senior advisors, legal experts, strategists, and a handful of courtiers who had long mastered the art of discretion. The topic? Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, and their complete removal from the line of succession. The decision had already been made in principle, but the discussion in this hidden room was about execution, optics, and controlling the fallout. The tension in the room was palpable. Whispered conversations punctuated by the occasional authoritative statement from the king. The walls, adorned with centuries of history, seemed to absorb the anxiety, reflecting it back onto those who dared to sit within. This was not just a meeting about titles or precedents. It was a meeting about legacy, about controlling the narrative, about ensuring that the monarchy remained intact despite a decision that would shock the world. Charles spoke with the calm, measured tone of a man accustomed to power. "We cannot allow external pressures to dictate the future of this institution," he said, eyes scanning the room. "Tradition must be upheld. Stability must prevail." Every word was deliberate, every pause calculated. Yet beneath the surface, there was the unmistakable weight of responsibility, the human element of a father and a monarch making a decision that would reverberate far beyond the walls of the palace. The advisors chimed in, each bringing their expertise. Legal experts outlined the constitutional implications. "This action is unprecedented," one whispered. "There is no historical precedent for a sovereign unilaterally removing children from succession. Every move must be airtight." Another spoke of optics, of media management, and the potential backlash from both domestic and international audiences. Every word, every suggestion was weighed against the potential consequences. What made the meeting extraordinary wasn't just the content of the discussions, it was the emotion in the room. Hidden behind composed faces were undercurrents of tension, fear, and anticipation. Some advisors worried about public perception, while others feared internal divisions within the royal family. All understood the stakes. This wasn't a simple administrative matter. It was a decision that would be dissected, criticized, and remembered for generations. And everyone in that room knew that any misstep could ignite chaos. Yet amidst the strategic planning, there were whispers of a more personal conflict. The decision to remove Archie and Lilibet wasn't simply a matter of tradition or politics. It was deeply personal. Family history, rivalries, unspoken grievances, and long-standing tensions all played a role. Some advisors had witnessed subtle interactions between Charles and Harry over the years, moments of coldness, small slights, and miscommunications that, when viewed in retrospect, formed a pattern. The removal of the children from succession was more than policy. It was a culmination of decades of complicated, sometimes painful family dynamics. And then came the moment that would become pivotal. One of the senior advisors leaned in, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Sire, there is one matter we need to consider before this is finalized." The room fell silent. All attention turned to him. He revealed a piece of information that, until that moment, had been unknown to most present. A secret correspondence, hidden letters, and notes between members of the royal family, discussing the children's status, potential threats to tradition, and even the possibility of public controversy if the matter were mishandled. The revelation sent ripples through the room. Even seasoned advisors felt the weight of history pressing down. Charles listened carefully, absorbing every detail, weighing every possibility. He understood that the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet. It was about maintaining the monarchy's reputation, controlling the narrative, and ensuring that a single decision did not unravel centuries of carefully constructed legacy. Yet, despite the gravity, he was resolute. The decision had to be executed, and it had to be done in a way that minimized fallout while asserting authority. The meeting stretched on for hours. Maps of succession, historical precedents, potential legal challenges, and media strategies were discussed in painstaking detail. Every scenario was explored, every risk assessed. Advisors debated, sometimes heatedly, about the potential consequences, the timing of announcements. But what happened behind the closed doors wasn't just about strategy, it was about human emotions colliding with duty. One advisor, known for his loyalty to Harry, argued passionately for caution. "Sire, the impact on the children is enormous. There are other ways to manage tradition without removing them entirely." His words hung in the air, heavy with moral weight. Charles paused, considering the statement, but ultimately reaffirmed his decision. Tradition, he decided, must outweigh personal sentiment. The room absorbed the finality of his choice. And yet, even as the meeting concluded, there was a sense of unease. Advisors filed out quietly, exchanging glances, knowing that while the plan was set, the fallout could be unpredictable. Whispers of dissent, possible leaks, and media speculation lingered in the air. This was a decision that could not be undone, but it could certainly be challenged, debated, and exploited by those who sought to question the monarchy's actions. The hidden meeting was over, but its effects were only beginning. Plans were set in motion for communication, legal positioning, and public messaging, but the human element, the shock, anger, and grief of Harry and Meghan, remained unpredictable. No advisor could control emotion, no strategy could account for every variable. The personal stakes were immense, and the palace understood that the true challenge lay ahead, managing not just a decision, but the reaction of a family that had been fractured in ways few could fully comprehend. And while the world would never see the details of that meeting, the consequences would become painfully visible. Leaks, hints, and subtle signals would emerge in the weeks and months that followed, exposing the tension, the planning, and the extraordinary measures taken to execute a decision that history would remember. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle maneuver was a reminder that power and family often collide in the most dramatic ways. The news hit Meghan like a thunderclap. She had already sensed tension, seen the subtle shifts in palace behavior, but nothing could have prepared her for the confirmation. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, her children, were being erased from the line of succession. Forever. The words echoed in her mind, refusing to settle, refusing to allow her a single moment of calm. For Meghan, this was more than protocol or tradition. It was personal. It was her family, and it demanded a reaction. Her first instinct was disbelief. Could this really be happening? She knew the monarchy was steeped in centuries of tradition, that hierarchy and duty often outweighed sentiment. But erasing children? Not just moving them down the line, not limiting privileges, but removing them entirely? That crossed a line she had assumed no one, even a king, would dare approach. And yet here she was, faced with a reality more surreal than any Hollywood script, more brutal than any media narrative she had endured. She paced the quiet rooms of Frogmore Cottage, hands clasped tightly, mind racing. Every scenario played out in her head. Public confrontation? Impossible. The media would twist every word, turning outrage into scandal. Legal action? Perhaps, but slow, cumbersome, uncertain. Retreat? Unthinkable. This was her children's future, their legacy, and she could not, would not, remain silent. The fury grew in tandem with fear. She thought of Archie, just a little boy, too young to understand the magnitude of what had happened, yet instinctively sensing the tension and weight in his parents' reactions. She thought of Lilibet Diana, the youngest, her innocence like a fragile shield in a world suddenly hostile. The protective instinct in Meghan flared, sharp and uncompromising. She would fight, not just for herself or Harry, but for them. They were entitled to this, and she would make sure no one could take it lightly. Her mind turned to strategy. Meghan had long learned the power of public narrative, the ability to wield media and communication as a weapon, a shield, and a spotlight. But this was different. This was not a story for headlines or interviews. It was a matter of legality, of family, of legacy. She began mapping out options, weighing alliances, potential allies, and timing. Every move had consequences. Every word could escalate or defuse tension. The stakes were immense, but so was her resolve. Despite the fury, there was fear. Fear for Harry. He had always carried the weight of expectation with grace. But this was a blow even he could not have anticipated. The anger that burned within him was mirrored, amplified, by Meghan's own feelings. And yet, fear was practical. Fear dictated caution, forced patience, and demanded careful navigation of a system designed to punish missteps. The palace was a minefield, and one false step could have devastating repercussions. But fear could not dominate for long. Anger fueled action, and Meghan was ready to act. She thought of her previous battles, the obstacles she had faced, and the strategies she had used to survive scrutiny and criticism. This, she realized, was the ultimate test. Not just for her, not just for Harry, but for the children whose names had suddenly become political chess pieces. Every instinct screamed, this was her fight, and she would not back down. She reached out to trusted allies, people who had navigated the treacherous waters of royalty and media. Their advice was blunt. Control the narrative, protect the children, anticipate every move from the palace. They discussed timing, messaging, and potential leaks. Every option was considered, every possible fallout calculated. It was a war fought in whispers, emails, and private calls, far from the public eye, yet with consequences that would soon ripple across the globe. At the same time, Meghan grappled with the personal dimension. Family loyalty, betrayal, and expectation collided in her mind. How could the king, Harry's father, the grandfather of her children, make such a radical decision without warning? Was this a reflection of personal animosity, tradition, or a calculated move to assert control? The questions had no easy answers, only the undeniable reality of the situation. Her children were being removed from a legacy they had every right to inherit. In private moments, Meghan allowed herself to imagine the impact on the children. She thought of Archie, with his bright eyes and quick smile, suddenly shielded from understanding by a parent's protective secrecy. She thought of Lilibet, small and innocent, unknowingly caught in a web of power, legacy, and expectation. The images fueled her determination. This wasn't just a political move. It was a moral fight, a question of justice, fairness, and parental duty. And she would not fail. Her fury manifested in action. Emails were sent, calls were made, and plans began to take shape. She consulted legal experts, media strategists, and confidants, all working quietly to prepare for the inevitable fallout. Every message, every meeting, every calculated move was aimed at one goal: protecting Archie and Lilibet, preserving their legacy, and ensuring that the palace could not claim absolute control without challenge. Yet the human side of Meghan's reaction cannot be ignored. Fear and anger were intertwined with profound sadness. The knowledge that her children had been subjected to such a radical, unilateral decision by a family they loved was emotionally crushing. Sleepless nights followed, filled with contemplation and anxiety. Conversations with Harry were intense, emotionally charged, sometimes filled with tears, sometimes with sharp arguments. The stakes were personal, the emotions raw, and the path forward anything but clear. And then came the moment that would define the early phase of this crisis. Meghan made a call that had the potential to change the entire trajectory of events. It was calculated, risky, and unprecedented. The person on the other end listened carefully, offering advice and options, and perhaps revealing a pathway that had been hidden from her before. The conversation ended with a plan, tentative but bold, aimed at protecting her children and asserting their rights in a situation that had suddenly spiraled into chaos. But as Meghan prepared to act, she knew one thing: nothing would be straightforward. The palace would resist, the media would scrutinize, and the world would judge. Every decision carried risk, every move was a gamble. Yet, amidst the fear, fury, and uncertainty, a clear thread emerged. Meghan would fight. She would protect, and she would ensure that Archie and Lilibet's names were not erased quietly, invisibly, or permanently from history. The tension had been building for months, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A glance here, a whispered comment there, a coldness in the tone of a conversation that once held warmth. But now, with the confirmation that Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana had been removed from the line of succession, the simmering tension erupted into a full-blown confrontation. Harry could no longer remain silent, could no longer contain the storm of anger, frustration, and disbelief that had been growing inside him. And the person standing directly in the path of that storm was his brother, Prince William. It began with a message. Not a text, not an email, but a summons that demanded a meeting. Harry didn't know exactly what he expected when he agreed. He assumed there would be polite conversation, perhaps some acknowledgement of the situation, a minimal display of empathy. But as soon as he saw William's face, the anger he had tried to suppress surged to the surface. The years of rivalry, misunderstanding, and resentment, some public, some private, had coalesced into a single, unavoidable moment. The room was quiet, deceptively so. No cameras, no witnesses beyond the two brothers. Just the weight of history, the legacy of a family fractured by expectation, duty, and human imperfection. Harry didn't waste time on pleasantries. "How could you allow this to happen?" he demanded, voice sharp, eyes blazing. "Our children, they are your nieces and nephews. And you're just standing by." William's response was measured, calm, almost too calm. "It's not about standing by," he said, his tone steady but unreadable. "This is about tradition, about what is best for the monarchy. You know the rules." But Harry didn't accept it. He couldn't. Rules were one thing. Erasing children from history was another. The conversation quickly escalated, words snapping like fire across dry kindling. Accusations flew. Past grievances resurfaced. The tension that had lain dormant for years now erupted in full force. "You don't understand," Harry said, voice cracking with emotion. "This isn't about rules. It's about our family, our kids. How can you prioritize protocol over them?" William's eyes hardened, a mix of frustration and defensiveness. "I'm trying to protect the institution, Harry. You think this is easy? You think it's just about feelings? There are consequences we have to consider, real consequences." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. Protect the institution? At the expense of family? The contradiction was unbearable. For a moment, he imagined the childhood they had shared, the innocence of their youth, the moments of laughter and sibling camaraderie. And yet, those memories were now overshadowed by the reality of the present, a decision that had torn them apart and threatened the future of their children. And then came the moments of raw honesty. Harry, usually so composed under public scrutiny, let his guard down. "You don't get it, William," he said, voice trembling. "This isn't just about the monarchy. This is about Archie. This is about Lilibet. You're erasing them. How do you think that feels, knowing that their grandfather, the man they should be able to trust, has decided they don't matter?" William's jaw tightened. He looked away for a moment, grappling with his own emotions, with the enormity of the situation. He had been raised to value duty above all else, to uphold tradition, to maintain the monarchy's image at all costs. But he had also loved his brother once, deeply, and the sight of Harry standing before him, furious and vulnerable, forced a reckoning. There was guilt there, yes, but also stubborn adherence to principle. The confrontation was more than words. It was a collision of values, a clash of personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. The conversation took a darker turn when past grievances were dredged up. Childhood incidents, media portrayals, and old misunderstandings all became ammunition. Harry accused William of siding with the palace, of prioritizing optics over family, of failing to protect the children. William fired back, accusing Harry of making rash decisions, of undermining the monarchy, of drawing unnecessary attention to what he claimed should have been handled discreetly. The room crackled with tension, the air thick with emotion and unspoken history. Then came the moment that changed everything in the room. William, in a rare display of candor, revealed a secret. One that Harry had not anticipated. "This isn't just about the children," he said quietly, almost reluctantly. "There are conversations you don't know about. decisions being made that you wouldn't understand. I didn't make them, but I support them because his voice trailed off, leaving Harry hanging, his mind racing to fill in the blanks. The implication was clear. There were forces at play beyond his comprehension, beyond even the immediate family circle, shaping decisions in ways he had never imagined. Harry's reaction was instantaneous: disbelief, anger, frustration. You're telling me there's a plan? A plan that removes my kids from history, and you think I should accept it? Then I should stay quiet. The words were a mixture of accusation and incredulity. He felt the familiar surge of protective instinct, now amplified to its most extreme. This was no longer just about protocol or tradition. It was about standing up for what was right, about fighting for his children in a system that seemed determined to erase them. The brothers sat in silence for a few moments after the verbal storm subsided. Each was processing the confrontation in their own way. Harry was consumed by anger and the need to act. William was grappling with loyalty to family versus duty to the institution. The room, though quiet, still held the echoes of the emotional intensity that had just unfolded. And though the conversation had not resolved anything, it had laid bare the fractures within the family, the divisions that had long been simmering under the surface. Finally, Harry stood, the resolve in his eyes unmistakable. I won't let this happen quietly, he said, voice steady now, a mix of determination and defiance. Archie and Lilibet have a right to their place, and I will do whatever it takes to protect them. William watched him leave, a mixture of frustration and concern etched across his face. He knew the battle was far from over, that the confrontation had set off a chain of events that could escalate beyond anything the family had experienced. The tension between duty, tradition, and personal loyalty had reached a tipping point. And neither brother could predict how far this conflict would go, nor the consequences that would ripple through the monarchy, the media, and the public. As Harry walked away, a thought struck him, a chilling realization that would fuel his next moves. The confrontation had made one thing painfully clear. The palace, the advisors, and even his own brother were aligned in a way that left him no choice but to take decisive action. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And the next move would not just define his fight. It could redefine the future of the monarchy itself. The morning after the confrontation with William, Harry sat alone in the quiet of his study, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like never before. The palace had made its decision. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana had been removed from the line of succession. That was final, official, and legally recognized. Or so the public and many in the royal household were led to believe. But Harry, fueled by both rage and an unrelenting sense of justice, knew that finality didn't mean inevitability. There had to be a legal avenue, a way to challenge the decision and restore his children's rightful place in history. First, he needed clarity. The laws governing the British monarchy are ancient, complex, and often ambiguous, written for a world that no longer exists. The line of succession is determined by a combination of statute, precedent, and constitutional practice. Changing it isn't impossible, but unilateral deletions by the sovereign alone? That was unprecedented. The very idea of challenging a monarch's decision seemed almost absurd, but Harry refused to be intimidated by centuries of protocol. He reached out to legal experts, constitutional scholars, royal lawyers, and barristers with decades of experience navigating the delicate intersection of law and monarchy. Their advice was measured, sometimes bleak. This is uncharted territory, one senior constitutional lawyer explained. There is no historical precedent for overturning a sovereign's decision to remove a child from the succession line. It's legally complex, but not necessarily impossible. You would need to challenge both procedure and principle. Procedure, principle, and precedent became the pillars of Harry's research. Procedure referred to the specific legal steps taken to finalize the decision. Were proper protocols followed? Were the advisors acting within the scope of the law? Or was there room to argue that the decision was flawed from the outset? Principle referred to the broader constitutional and ethical implications. Did the monarch have the absolute authority to erase children from succession without consent, debate, or oversight? Precedent involved historical cases of succession changes, removals, abdications, and exclusions, none of which mirrored the present situation perfectly, but could offer insights or leverage. Each expert Harry consulted approached the situation differently. Some emphasized the difficulty of overturning a decision sanctioned by the sovereign. Others hinted at loopholes, procedural errors, or avenues for appeal through parliamentary intervention. "It's a delicate dance," one barrister warned. "You tread carefully, or the institution could portray any challenge as a personal attack on the king rather than a legal pursuit." Harry understood immediately. The stakes were not just legal, they were deeply political, social, and personal. Every action would be scrutinized, every word analyzed, every strategy dissected. But Harry refused to allow the complexity to deter him. His children's futures were at stake, and he knew he had to act. He began compiling evidence, documenting procedural inconsistencies, and consulting constitutional historians who could provide authoritative interpretations. The more he learned, the more he realized that, while the road was treacherous, it was not impassable. There were legal precedents for challenging decisions made by the sovereign, though usually in far less emotionally charged contexts. The key was framing the argument correctly, balancing law with morality, procedure with principle. And then there was the media dimension, a factor Harry could not ignore. Any legal action would be intensely public. It would invite scrutiny, speculation, and criticism. The monarchy would undoubtedly frame any challenge as controversial, perhaps even hostile. The challenge was to protect his children's reputations, assert their rights, and maintain credibility, all while navigating a media environment that thrived on scandal, speculation, and emotion. Harry realized that the legal battle would not be fought solely in courts. It would be fought in the court of public opinion as well. As he delved deeper, Harry began to uncover nuances in the law that could work in his favor. There were ambiguities in how succession is regulated, particularly concerning the rights of minor children and the scope of the sovereign's authority. He learned about historical cases where parliamentary intervention had altered succession lines, where legal precedent had overridden royal decisions, and where public opinion had exerted pressure on entrenched institutions. These examples, while not identical, offered hope. They suggested that, under the right circumstances, even the most entrenched decisions could be challenged. Harry also began considering allies. Legal experts were one thing, but having support within the monarchy or from influential political figures could strengthen his case. He reached out quietly, gauging reactions, testing the waters. Some were sympathetic, others cautious, wary of being seen as opposing the king. The delicate balance of influence, loyalty, and discretion became a constant consideration. Every conversation carried risk, every revelation could be interpreted in multiple ways, and every ally came with their own limitations and motivations. And yet, the more Harry explored, the clearer one thing became: inaction was not an option. The removal of Archie and Lilibet was not a mere inconvenience or administrative quirk. It was a profound injustice, a moral and legal violation that demanded action. The thought of allowing the decision to stand unchallenged, of letting his children's names be erased without a fight, was intolerable. He had to act, no matter the obstacles, no matter the consequences. The legal path was fraught with uncertainty, but Harry felt a growing sense of determination. The laws could be interpreted, the procedures questioned, and the public could be mobilized to apply pressure. It was a multi-front battle, legal, political, and emotional. And it required precision, courage, and resilience. Harry realized that success would not be guaranteed, but the attempt itself was a necessary assertion of parental duty, moral responsibility, and historical accountability. Even as he strategized, Harry faced the emotional toll of the situation. Nights were sleepless, days were relentless. Every new piece of information, every procedural detail, every potential ally or adversary intensified the pressure. The children, innocent and unaware, remained the center of his focus. Every decision, every consultation, every legal maneuver was aimed at securing their place in history, restoring their rights, and protecting them from a legacy rewritten without consent. And then came the first breakthrough, a potential procedural oversight in the official documentation that finalized the removal. It was small, almost negligible to those outside the legal field, but significant enough to offer a foothold. Harry's legal team pounced on it, analyzing, debating, and formulating strategies. The breakthrough injected a sense of hope into the process, a belief that the battle was not entirely unwinnable. The path was unclear, the obstacles immense, but there was a chance. And in a situation where hope was rare, even a small glimmer was enough to fuel determination. But Harry also knew this. The legal fight was only one piece of the puzzle. The emotional and public dimensions were equally critical. He had to manage media narratives, maintain public sympathy, and anticipate palace countermoves. One misstep could undermine the legal efforts entirely. It was a high-stakes chess game, with history, morality, and family all at play. And as Harry prepared for the next steps, one thought crystallized with brutal clarity. The palace had not anticipated the lengths he would go to protect his children. The legal system, the media, and public perception were all tools he could leverage. He was no longer reacting in shock. He was planning, calculating, and strategizing with precision. By the time the news leaked, the world was already in shock. Headlines flashed across screens in London, New York, Sydney, and beyond. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana removed from the line of succession. Social media erupted with outrage, confusion, and speculation. Fans, critics, royal watchers, and casual observers all weighed in, turning the story into a global phenomenon within hours. For Harry and Meghan, the media storm was both a challenge and a weapon, a tool to rally public opinion and, at the same time, a dangerous arena where every word could be twisted. It began subtly, with a quiet ripple in online forums and news sites, as whispers of the palace's decision started to circulate. Then came the leaks, small, seemingly innocuous hints from anonymous sources within the palace. Meetings held behind closed doors, advisors consulting legal experts, discussions of procedure and tradition. The public couldn't see the details, but the pattern was unmistakable. Something major was happening, and it involved Harry, Meghan, and their children. Within hours, major media outlets picked up the story. Tweets exploded, Instagram stories were shared, and YouTube commentary channels churned out non-stop updates. Royal children erased from history? Shock decision by King Charles. The future of Archie and Lilibet in jeopardy. The narrative was consuming the world, and Harry realized immediately that controlling perception would be as important as navigating legal avenues. The media storm was double-edged. On one side, it amplified the injustice, allowing Harry and Meghan to highlight the personal impact of the decision. Public outrage could pressure the monarchy, sway political opinion, and bring scrutiny to the unprecedented move. On the other side, it carried enormous risk. Every leak, every statement, every interview could be twisted. Critics were ready to claim that Harry and Meghan were exploiting their children for attention or undermining the monarchy. Managing this delicate balance required careful coordination, timing, and messaging. Harry and Meghan began monitoring reactions obsessively. They watched global headlines, tracked social media trends, and studied commentary for potential opportunities. Each news segment, each viral post, offered insight into public sentiment and allowed them to adjust strategy in real time. Every narrative that emerged, from sympathetic coverage emphasizing parental protection to critical pieces framing the story as a royal dispute, was analyzed meticulously. The goal was clear: ensure that the focus remained on the children, their rights, and the unprecedented nature of the palace's decision. In the UK, tabloids were relentless. Some sought to vilify Harry and Meghan, portraying them as overreacting, defiant, or disrespectful. Others sympathized, framing the story as a historic injustice against the children. Internationally, coverage ranged from fascination to condemnation. In the United States, news networks highlighted the human drama, the parental perspective, the outrage at tradition overriding compassion. In Australia and Canada, opinion pieces dissected the potential political implications and the morality of the monarchy's decision. The world had become a stage, and Harry and Meghan were at the center of it. The couple also faced targeted attacks from media outlets historically critical of them. Headlines questioned their credibility, motives, and loyalty. Yet every attack inadvertently fueled public interest. Critics couldn't ignore the story because it touched on universal themes: family, justice, legacy, and parental protection. Harry and Meghan began to recognize a crucial truth. Controlling the narrative was less about silencing critics and more about ensuring that the story's core message, the children's removal and the injustice inherent in it, remained dominant. Social media played an unprecedented role. Tweets, threads, and viral videos allowed the public to engage directly, offering support, outrage, and speculation. Hashtags began trending within hours. Hashtag Justice for Archie. Hashtag Save Lilibet. Hashtag Royal Controversy. These online movements, though decentralized, created pressure points that the palace could not ignore. Harry and Meghan watched carefully, identifying trends, amplifying supportive voices, and preparing for strategic media engagement. They understood that the court of public opinion could wield as much influence as legal arguments, especially in a situation that blurred the line between personal family matter and institutional decision. Behind the scenes, the palace was scrambling. Advisors and communications teams worked frantically to contain leaks, frame the narrative, and mitigate public backlash. Every press release, every statement, every interview was calculated to maintain control. But the story was out of their hands. Public scrutiny intensified. Even sympathetic allies within the royal household acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the decision and the potential consequences of mismanaging public perception. The media storm was no longer just an external challenge. It had become a tool, a battleground, and a reflection of the deep fractures within the family. Harry and Meghan decided to engage strategically. Carefully chosen statements, subtle interviews, and selective leaks allowed them to maintain narrative control without overexposing their children. They highlighted the personal and human impact, emphasizing parental responsibility and emotional devastation. They avoided sensationalism, instead focusing on morality, fairness, and historical precedent. Every word was deliberate. Every move was part of a larger strategy to maintain public empathy while preparing for the inevitable legal and familial confrontations ahead. The media also amplified the emotional stakes. Stories focused on the children's innocence, the heartbreak of the parents, and the unprecedented nature of the decision. Experts weighed in. Constitutional scholars, royal historians, and child psychologists analyzed the situation, offering context and framing. Public debate raged, with opinion pieces dissecting morality, tradition, and legality. Harry and Meghan realized that this public engagement, while risky, was essential. The world needed to understand that this was not a trivial dispute. It was a profound challenge to the values of justice, fairness, and family. Yet the media storm was only the beginning. As coverage intensified, so did leaks, whispers, and hints of internal palace conflict. Anonymous sources suggested divisions within the family, disputes among advisors, and disagreements about the legality of the decision. Every revelation fueled speculation and heightened tension. Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that the palace would not remain passive. They had to anticipate counter-narratives, spin, and potential attacks, while keeping the focus on the children. The couple also faced personal challenges amid the chaos. The stress of public scrutiny, the relentless media attention, and the emotional weight of the situation took a toll. Nights were sleepless, days were consumed by strategy, and every interaction carried emotional intensity. Yet, even in the chaos, Harry and Meghan found strength in each other, drawing resilience from shared purpose and unyielding commitment to their children. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, a constant reminder of the stakes and the urgency of their actions. And then came the turning point. A major media outlet released a detailed expose, outlining the unprecedented legal and historical context of the decision, while also highlighting the personal and emotional impact on Harry, Meghan, and the children. Public reaction intensified, trending hashtags multiplied, and global commentary reached a fever pitch. The palace could no longer control the narrative, and the world was watching. Harry and Meghan realized that the media storm, once feared, had become an ally, amplifying their message and creating pressure points they could leverage in legal and familial strategies. But even as the story dominated headlines, Harry and Meghan knew one thing. The media storm was unpredictable. Public opinion could shift, leaks could mislead, and narratives could be spun against them. Every move required precision, foresight, and courage. The stakes were immense, the consequences irreversible, and the scrutiny unrelenting. Yet in that chaos, they found clarity, determination, and purpose. The fight for Archie and Lilibet's place in history was no longer just private, it was global. The palace, with all its grandeur and centuries of tradition, had always been a place of secrets. Hidden passages, whispered conversations, and unspoken rules created a web of intrigue that few outsiders could ever fully understand. But in the wake of Archie and Lilibet Diana's removal from the line of succession, those secrets began to emerge. Whispered leaks, anonymous sources, and covert communications revealed that the palace's corridors were alive with discussion, tension, and, in some cases, dissent. For Harry and Meghan, these insider revelations became both a lifeline and a weapon. It started with small hints, offhand comments in public appearances, subtle shifts in protocol, and glimpses of unease among courtiers and advisors. Nothing overt, nothing that could be pinned down as definitive proof. Yet Harry, ever attuned to nuance, sensed a pattern. He realized that the palace was not a monolith. Within its walls were individuals with loyalties, opinions, and information that could prove invaluable in challenging the decision against his children. The first substantive leak came from a mid-level advisor, someone who had long been loyal to Harry and had seen the inner workings of the royal household up close. The message was simple but explosive. Not everyone within the palace agreed with the removal of Archie and Lilibet. Some viewed it as extreme, unprecedented, and morally indefensible. Others were frustrated by the secrecy, the lack of consultation, and the potential fallout. The revelation was a shock. Harry had expected resistance from tradition and protocol, but he had not anticipated the fissures within the institution itself. These insider revelations grew rapidly. Private emails, internal memos, and recorded conversations surfaced, suggesting that there had been heated debates behind closed doors. Some advisors expressed moral concern, questioning whether the king had overstepped his authority. Others warned about public perception, predicting that the decision could provoke international outrage and undermine confidence in the monarchy. For Harry and Meghan, this was a game-changer. The palace was divided, and that division could be leveraged. One particularly damning revelation involved a senior legal advisor who had initially supported the decision. Internal communications suggested that the advisor had later expressed regret, citing concerns about the unprecedented nature of the action and potential legal vulnerabilities. This insider information provided Harry with both moral and strategic ammunition. If those who had once defended the removal now doubted its validity, it lent weight to the argument that the decision was not as unassailable as the palace publicly claimed. The revelations weren't limited to legal or procedural concerns. Courtiers shared stories about the king's private conversations, shedding light on his mindset, motivations, and thought process. Some accounts suggested that the decision was influenced as much by personal grievances and family tensions as by tradition or protocol. Others hinted at strategic maneuvering, aimed at consolidating control and asserting authority over the next generation. For Harry, these insights were invaluable. They painted a picture of a decision that was not purely institutional but deeply human, and therefore contestable. At the same time, the leaks revealed potential allies within the palace. Individuals with access to critical information, historical documents, and procedural knowledge expressed discreet willingness to support Harry and Meghan. Some had been sympathetic to the couple for years, quietly offering guidance and advice. Others were motivated by a sense of justice, recognizing the moral implications of erasing children from history. For Harry, this network represented both a shield and a tool, providing avenues for strategic action that could influence both legal outcomes and public perception. Yet navigating these revelations required extreme caution. Not every insider could be trusted. Some were opportunists, seeking personal gain or leverage. Others were loyal to the monarchy above all else and could become adversaries if approached incorrectly. Harry and Meghan had to weigh every piece of information carefully, verifying sources, cross-referencing facts, and considering the potential consequences of acting on leaks. One misstep could expose their strategy, compromise their position, or invite public backlash. The revelations also highlighted the palace's internal fear. Advisors worried that once the public understood the unprecedented nature of the removal, the backlash could be devastating. Some feared legal challenges, while others anticipated international scrutiny. There were whispers that some members of the household were actively working to mediate, seeking compromise solutions that could protect the children without directly defying the king. These hints of internal negotiation suggested that the palace was not entirely united, and that cracks in the armor could be exploited strategically. For Harry and Meghan, the revelations underscored the complexity of the battle ahead. The legal, public, and familial dimensions of the conflict were intertwined with palace dynamics that were opaque, volatile, and constantly shifting. Every move required precision. Every decision had to account for multiple variables. Internal support, legal precedent, public perception, and the potential for backlash. It was a chess game on a scale Harry had never experienced, with stakes higher than anything he had faced before. Amid the revelations, Harry also faced personal reflection. He realized that understanding the palace from the inside, through the eyes of those who lived and worked there, was critical. The secrecy, the unspoken rules, and the human motivations all provided context for the king's decision, and for the paths available to challenge it. The insights gained from insiders were not merely tactical. They offered a deeper understanding of the institution, its vulnerabilities, and the moral imperative to act. The insider revelations culminated in a particularly shocking disclosure. A senior advisor had documented concerns about potential international legal challenges. The advisor suggested that other constitutional powers, parliamentary oversight, historical precedent, or international opinion, could be leveraged to contest the decision. This knowledge shifted Harry's strategy. It was no longer about reactive defense. It was about proactive planning, using every tool available to secure his children's future. And yet, the revelations carried risk. Public knowledge of insider dissent could be spun by the palace as a breach of loyalty or an attack on the institution. Acting too quickly or too aggressively could undermine legal efforts, alienate potential allies, and inflame media scrutiny. Harry and Meghan had to balance urgency with discretion, aggression with strategy, emotion with calculation. The revelations were powerful, but only if wielded wisely. The emotional impact of these insider